The scent of fresh roses and jasmine filled the warm afternoon air, blending with the expensive perfume of the elegantly dressed guests. White silk tents shimmered under the golden glow of the setting sun, their delicate fabric swaying gently in the breeze. A soft melody floated through the garden, played by a quartet nestled beneath an arch of cascading wisteria. It was a wedding straight out of a fairy tale, perfect in every sense of the word. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored black tuxedo, exhaling slowly. His heart pounded against his ribs, but not because of the ceremony. He was used to standing in front of boardrooms full of executives, making decisions that could change the fate of his family's company. This should have been easy, but something felt off. His fingers curled into a fist at his side as his gaze swept across the sea of well-dressed guests. There, standing at the far edge of the gathering, half hidden behind a group of distant relatives, were Marcus, his older brother, the man Ethan hadn't spoken to in years. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, expression unreadable, posture too casual. He wasn't supposed to be here. Ethan had made it clear. Marcus wasn't welcome, but their father, Chief Allen, had insisted. Family is family, Ethan, his father had said in that commanding voice of his. You might not see eye to eye, but this is your wedding. He deserves to be here. Ethan wasn't so sure. Marcus had made it clear long ago that he held nothing but resentment for him. And yet there he was, watching from the shadows, a ghost from the past. A gentle touch on his arm pulled Ethan back to the present. He turned to see Lena, his bride, standing beside him. She was breathtaking in an elegant gown of white lace, the fabric flowing down her frame like water. Her deep brown eyes met his, filled with love, but also a flicker of uncertainty. "You okay?" she whispered, squeezing his hand. Ethan forced a smile. "Of course. Just—" Her smile softened. "You look handsome." "And you look like something out of a dream," he murmured. Lena let out a soft laugh, but Ethan could feel the tension in her grip. She was nervous too. This day had taken months to plan. Every detail painstakingly chosen. The flowers, the music, the seating arrangements. All of it carefully designed for a flawless wedding. Everything had to be perfect. At the back of the garden, Max, Ethan's German shepherd, sat tethered to a post near the entrance. The loyal dog had been with Ethan for years, a gift from his late mother. Usually calm and composed, Max was pacing now, his ears twitching, his tail stiff, his nose lifted to the air, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan frowned. Max never acted this way. "Is something wrong?" Lena asked, noticing his expression. "It's Max," Ethan said. "He's barking. He doesn't usually bark at nothing." Lena followed his gaze and shrugged lightly. "Maybe he's excited. It's a big day for him, too." Ethan wasn't convinced. Max wasn't the type of dog to get worked up over noise or crowds. He was trained, disciplined. If he was restless, it meant something was off. But there was no time to dwell on it. The officiant was waiting. The guests were watching. The ceremony began. The minister's voice rang out over the hushed crowd as Ethan and Lena exchanged vows. The words should have felt weighty, monumental, but Ethan's focus kept slipping. Back to Marcus, standing just out of reach. Back to Max, who had stopped barking but remained tense, ears erect, gaze locked on something unseen. Still, for a while, everything went smoothly. Lena's voice trembled slightly as she slid the wedding band onto Ethan's finger, her eyes shining with emotion. The crowd watched with warmth and admiration, some guests dabbing at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. A few whispered words of approval passed between relatives. Then came the moment that every wedding built toward, the seal of a promise. The minister turned to Ethan, a kind smile on his face. "You may now kiss the bride." Ethan leaned in, his hands finding Lena's waist as she lifted her face toward his. Their lips were inches apart when… Bark! Bark! A loud, sharp bark cut through the ceremony like a gunshot. Max was on his feet, ears pinned back, his entire body tensed like a coiled spring. Another bark exploded from his throat, more urgent this time. His leash strained as he lunged forward, claws scraping against the wooden post. A ripple of unease passed through the guests. Lena flinched, blinking in confusion. A few guests turned, whispering. Clara, Lena's mother, shot Ethan a murderous glare from the front row. "Do something about that dog," she hissed, voice sharp and low. "This is ruining the moment." Ethan hesitated. Something about Max's barking felt different. It wasn't just noise. It was a warning. But Clara's glare bore into him, and the murmurs of the crowd were growing louder. Ethan lifted a hand and signaled to one of the ushers, who quickly moved toward Max. "Calm him down," Ethan instructed. The usher knelt beside Max, patting his head and murmuring something in an attempt to soothe him. Max quieted, for a second. But then his ears flicked forward. His body stiffened again. His growl deepened. And then his gaze locked onto something. Not at Ethan, not at Lena, but at the center of the reception area. At the grand, towering, pristine white wedding cake. The three-tiered masterpiece stood on a decorated pedestal, draped in delicate sugar flowers and gold ribbons. It had been the talk of the guests upon arrival. Everyone admired its beauty, its craftsmanship. But Max wasn't admiring it. He was staring at it, snarling, teeth bared. A new wave of whispers spread through the crowd. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone muttered. Ethan felt a cold prickle of unease at the base of his spine. This wasn't excitement. This wasn't nerves. Max had sensed something. But before Ethan could move, before he could say anything, the wedding was already unraveling. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by Max's low, guttural growl. The once joyous wedding had shifted. Something was wrong, and everyone felt it. Guests exchanged nervous glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The cake, which had been admired mere moments ago, now seemed like the center of something sinister. Ethan clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Why was Max fixated on the cake? He had known his dog for years. Max wasn't prone to meaningless outbursts. He barked with purpose, and right now that purpose was urgent. The usher near Max knelt and whispered soothing words, but Max wasn't calming down. Instead, his growls deepened, his body coiled with tension, his eyes never leaving the pristine, towering wedding cake. Lena's hand tightened around Ethan's. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ethan." Before he could answer, Clara's sharp voice cut through the tension. "Will someone please get that dog under control?" she snapped, shooting Ethan a seething look. "This is humiliating." Ethan turned to his cousin Lisa, who stood near the front row, her arms crossed, watching everything unfold with narrowed eyes. Lisa was sharp, observant, and right now, she looked deeply concerned. "Something's not right," she murmured. "Look at him, Ethan. He's not just barking. He's warning us." Ethan exhaled, his mind at war with itself. He wanted to believe it was nothing, that Max was simply reacting to the excitement of the day. But something about this felt different. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A few guests tried to downplay it. "Maybe he just smells food," one man joked, forcing a chuckle. "Yeah," another woman added, "dogs get crazy around sweets." But Aunt Naomi's voice cut through their dismissiveness like a blade. "Dogs don't bark at nothing," she said, standing slowly. She was dressed in deep emerald, her matching head wrap gleaming under the sunset. They see what we do not. They sense what we ignore. Clara rolled her eyes so hard it looked painful. Oh, for God's sake, Naomi. Not now. This is a wedding, not one of your superstitious seances. But Naomi didn't back down. She stared hard at the cake, then at Max, then at Ethan. Something is wrong, she repeated. Lisa stepped forward, her gaze flickering to Ethan. Maybe we should check the cake. Clara spun around so fast her heels scraped against the marble flooring. Are you insane? She hissed. You want to ruin my daughter's wedding over a barking dog? Lena swallowed hard beside Ethan. Mama, I think we should. Clara's face twisted in sheer disbelief. You can't be serious, she seethed.
This is now our wedding cake.
The one we spent months planning. What exactly do you think you're gonna find? Poison? The word hung heavy in the air. The crowd fell silent. A ripple of unease passed through them. Ethan looked at Lisa. She was watching Marcus. His older brother hadn't moved an inch. While everyone else was whispering, gasping, arguing, Marcus stood completely still, arms crossed, face unreadable. Too still. Ethan's stomach twisted. Before he could speak, Max snapped. He lunged. His leash snapped free from the usher's grasp. A blur of fur and motion shot through the wedding aisle as Max bolted toward the cake. A collective gasp erupted from the guests. Chairs scraped backward. Some people jumped up in shock. Clara screamed. Get that dog away from the cake. The wedding reception descended into chaos. Max launched himself onto the small stage where the cake stood, knocking over a row of decorative flowers in his pursuit. His claws scraped against the tablecloth as he circled the towering dessert, barking wildly, snapping at the bottom tier. Guests were frozen, caught between horror and confusion. A group of servers rushed forward to intervene, their faces pale. The baker, Nora, gasped as she pushed through the crowd, her hands shaking. What is happening? She shrieked. Why is that dog attacking my cake? Ethan moved, grabbing Max's collar and yanking him back with firm force. Max, enough. The dog stopped barking, but didn't stop growling. His body was rigid, his hackles raised, teeth bared toward the bottom layer of the cake. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Lisa grabbed Ethan's arm. Ethan, look at Marcus. Ethan's gaze snapped up, and there he was. Marcus, still standing at the edge of the crowd. Still watching. Still too calm. Their eyes met. And for a brief second, Ethan saw something. A flicker of amusement. A ghost of a smirk. Then it was gone. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. Clara was livid. This is humiliating, she shrieked, turning to the guests, hands raised in exasperation. Everyone, please, ignore this nonsense. This is just a stupid, misbehaving dog. Naomi, however, wasn't laughing. We need to check the cake, she said firmly. Nora looked horrified. Check it, she repeated. For what? I made this cake myself. I tasted it this morning before bringing it here. It's perfect. Then you have nothing to worry about, Lisa said coolly. Nora hesitated, glancing nervously at the guests. I don't understand, she stammered. Why? Why would I poison a cake? Nobody's accusing you, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. We just need to make sure everything's okay. Lena's voice was softer but firm. Please, Nora, she said, just let us check. The baker's fingers trembled at her sides. The crowd held their breath. Then, After a moment, Nora swallowed and reached for a knife. "I'll cut a small piece," she whispered, her hands visibly shaking, "and you'll see, there's nothing wrong." The garden was so quiet, Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. Nora pressed the knife against the bottom tier of the cake. The silver blade sank into the smooth white frosting. The first slice peeled away. And then Naomi's voice rang out, urgent. "Wait, wait." Everyone froze. Naomi stepped forward, her expression grave. "Don't touch it yet." Nora hesitated, confused. "Why not?" Naomi's gaze flickered to Ethan. "Let the dog sniff it first." The air turned ice cold. Ethan felt Lena stiffen beside him. The crowd whispered anxiously. Clara, however, exploded. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "Are we seriously taking orders from a dog now? Are we hosting a dog's birthday party? Or are we having a wedding?" But Naomi didn't look away. Her voice was steady. "Let Max sniff it." Ethan's pulse pounded.
His grip tightened around Max's leash.
He looked at Lena. She nodded once. Slowly, carefully, he brought Max forward. The dog's nose twitched. His ears flicked forward. And then he let out a deep, low growl. The cake was wrong. Ethan's stomach twisted into a cold knot of dread. Something was in the cake, and they were about to find out what. The crowd stood in tense silence, eyes locked on Max as his growl rumbled through the garden. The dog didn't move, his sharp gaze fixed on the exposed slice of cake, as if daring it to reveal its secrets. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. He had never seen Max behave this way, not even in the worst storms or in the presence of strangers. This was different. This was different. Lena's fingers curled tightly around his wrist. "Ethan," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Something's wrong." He knew it, too. Clara, however, had had enough. She stormed forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor beneath the tent. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she snapped, her voice laced with rage. "We are standing around waiting for a dog to approve a cake? Have we all lost our minds?" Aunt Naomi, standing firm beside the table, didn't budge. "If you want to ignore a warning, that's your choice," Naomi said, voice calm yet unyielding. Ethan exhaled slowly, then turned to Nora, the baker. She was trembling, clutching the knife in her hands, her knuckles white. "Cut another slice," Ethan said, his voice steady. Nora's eyes widened. "What?" "Cut another slice," he repeated, firmer this time. The murmur of guests grew louder. Clara threw up her hands. "Unbelievable! Ethan, you are letting superstitions ruin this wedding." Lena turned to her mother, her voice tight. "Mama, stop!" Clara's mouth snapped shut. Nora hesitated, her hands visibly shaking. I don't understand." "Why?" Ethan's gaze was cold. "Then prove it." A sharp inhale. Nora swallowed hard, looking to the guests for help. But no one spoke. Even the servers who had rushed forward moments ago now stood frozen, uncertain. With a trembling breath, she sliced another piece from the second tier. Max sniffed the air immediately. His body stiffened. His growl deepened. Lena inhaled sharply, gripping Ethan's arm. The cake was the problem. Nora took a step back, shaking her head violently. "No, this doesn't make sense. I made this cake with my own hands." Lisa stepped forward, arms crossed. Then tell us, after you made it, who else had access to it? Nora's breath hitched. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head.
No one.
Lisa narrowed her eyes. So you never left it unattended? Nora hesitated. Silence. Then her lips parted slightly, a crack in the certainty. I stepped away for just a moment, she whispered, only to check on the pastries in the back. Lisa's voice was razor sharp, and in that moment anyone could have touched it. The tension thickened. The guests, who had been murmuring moments ago, fell into complete silence. Then, suddenly, I saw someone near the cake earlier, a soft voice spoke. Everyone turned. It was a waitress, a young woman, barely in her 20s, her uniform slightly wrinkled from the evening's rush, her hands twisted nervously around the hem of her apron. Ethan stepped toward her, his voice careful but firm.
Who did you see?
She swallowed, eyes darting to the cake. I don't know his name, she said shakily, but he was wearing sunglasses and a hat. The crowd stirred uneasily. Clara let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. Oh, how convenient. A mystery man in a hat? Do we also suspect a ghost? But Ethan wasn't laughing. He turned, scanning the crowd. His gaze landed on Marcus. Marcus, who hadn't spoken a word since the chaos began. Marcus, whose arms were still crossed, expression too neutral. Marcus, who was now staring directly at the waitress. Ethan's blood ran cold. Lisa saw it too. She stepped closer to Ethan and whispered, "Look at him." Ethan already was. His brother's expression hadn't changed, but his body language had. The stillness, the watchfulness. It was like he was waiting. Marcus met Ethan's gaze, and this time he smirked. A slow, calculated smirk. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. Lisa's voice was a breath away. You don't think? I don't know, Ethan muttered. But we're about to find out. A deep breath. Then, Ethan turned back to the waitress. Where exactly did this man go after he left the cake? The girl hesitated. I don't know. I got called to the other side of the tent, and when I came back, he was gone. Lisa folded her arms. You never saw his face! She shook her head. Marcus chuckled softly. The sound made Ethan's blood boil. That's enough, Marcus said smoothly. This is getting out of hand. Ethan turned toward him, pulse pounding. You seem awfully comfortable right now. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Ethan said slowly, deliberately. Marcus tilted his head. Go ahead, little brother. Ethan's voice was ice. Where were you when the cake was left unattended? The crowd gasped. Marcus's smirk faltered. Only for a second, but Ethan caught it. A flicker of something. Lisa caught it too. The waitress took a nervous step back. Marcus started. But before he could answer, Joel, the doctor, suddenly stepped forward. He had been quiet through the chaos, watching from the sidelines, calculating. Now his voice rang through the silence. There's a way to settle this, Joel said. A simple test. The crowd turned toward him. Marcus's jaw clenched. Joel reached into his medical kit, retrieving a small vial and a test strip. Ethan's breath hitched. He knew exactly what this was. A Chi-eyed test. Joel's voice was calm, but sharp. If there's nothing wrong with the cake, then this test will be clear. But if there's something in it... Silence. Joel turned toward Ethan. Do you want me to test it? Ethan's mouth was dry. He turned toward Lena. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but she nodded. "Yes," Ethan said, voice like steel. "Do it." Joel nodded once. He stepped forward, dipped the test strip into the exposed slice of cake, and waited. The seconds dragged. The guests leaned in, breathless. Even Marcus. Then slowly, the test strip began to change color. Ethan's stomach dropped. The color darkened. Joel's face hardened. The crowd gasped. Ethan whispered, "What does that mean?" Joel lifted his eyes. His voice was grave. "It means," he said, "there's something in the cake." The moment Joel spoke, the crowd erupted. Gasps, whispers, and murmurs spread like wildfire, the elegant wedding transforming into a scene of rising panic. The once celebrated wedding cake now loomed like a sinister presence at the center of the reception, no longer a symbol of joy, but of something far more dangerous. Lena covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan felt her grip tighten around his wrist, her body trembling. "No," she whispered, almost as if denying it could make it untrue. Clara's reaction was much louder. She screamed.
This is sabotage!
She shrieked, stepping toward the cake as if it had personally attacked her.
Someone is trying to ruin my daughter's wedding.
The guests recoiled in fear, some stepping back while others exchanged alarmed glances. Lisa, however, wasn't looking at the cake. She was looking at Marcus. And Marcus, unlike everyone else, wasn't panicking. His arms were still crossed, his face unreadable. No shock, no fear, just... Lisa stepped forward, voice sharp. "Funny how you're the only one not reacting, Marcus." At the mention of his name, the entire garden fell silent. Marcus tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Lisa said. "Everyone else here is either terrified or trying to figure out what's going on. But you're just standing there, watching." Marcus chuckled, the sound low and mocking. "I wasn't aware it was a crime to remain calm," he mused. "But sure, let's jump to conclusions. Maybe I should throw my hands in the air and scream to fit in." His words should have diffused the moment, but they only made the suspicion grow. Ethan stepped forward. His voice was quieter, but there was an edge to it. "Where were you when the cake was unattended?" Marcus's smirk didn't waver. "Mingling with the guests, of course. Feel free to ask around." Lisa wasn't done. "Did you see anyone near the cake?" A pause. It was small, barely noticeable. But Ethan caught it. Marcus hesitated. Just for a second. Then, smoothly, he shrugged. "No, I didn't see anything." Joel, still holding the cyanide test, adjusted his glasses. "Then I'm sure you won't mind another test." Marcus's gaze flickered to him. "What kind of test?" Joel pulled out another test strip, then a small swab. He held it up. "This can detect traces of cyanide on a person's skin. If you didn't touch the cake, you have nothing to worry about." The crowd held its breath. Ethan felt it, the way the moment seemed to hang, fragile and delicate, waiting to crack. And then, for the first time that night, Marcus hesitated. It was the smallest thing. A brief clench of his jaw. A twitch of his fingers. A hesitation. No one else might have noticed. But Ethan did. Lisa did. Lena did. Max, still beside Ethan, let out a low growl. And just like that, the air shifted. Lisa took another step toward Marcus. "You're stalling." Marcus smiled, but this time it was different. There was something behind his eyes. A flicker of irritation. "I think I've entertained this nonsense long enough," Marcus said, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. If you're seriously accusing me, then I'm insulted. Do the test. Don't do the test. Don't do the test. Don't do the test. I don't care, but this paranoia is embarrassing. Ethan stepped forward. His voice was ice. Then take the test. Marcus's eyes locked onto his. Something unspoken passed between them. A challenge. A dare. A final opportunity for Marcus to walk away clean. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Then, with exaggerated slowness, he extended his hands toward Joel. Fine, test me. Joel didn't hesitate. He swabbed Marcus's palms, then slipped the strip into the solution. The seconds stretched, stretching impossibly long. The crowd leaned forward. Clara clutched her chest. Lena squeezed Ethan's hand. Lisa's jaw tightened. And then the strip darkened. Gasps exploded across the garden. Marcus's smirk vanished. For the first time, Ethan saw something break in his brother's expression. Not just frustration, not just arrogance. Fear, fear. Joel's voice was grave. There are traces of cyanide on your hands. The world tilted. Everything blurred. The whispers became deafening. Marcus took a step back. This is a mistake, he said, his voice suddenly tense. I didn't. You didn't what? Lisa demanded. Marcus's eyes darted toward Ethan. I didn't put anything in the cake. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Then why is there cyanide on your hands, Marcus? Marcus's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in years, Marcus, his arrogant, cocky, always in-control brother, had no answer. Lena's breath was shaky. Oh my God, she whispered. Aunt Naomi exhaled sharply. We have our answer. Marcus's entire demeanor changed. His body stiffened, his expression hardening. Not with guilt, but with anger. This is insane, Marcus spat. You're all turning on me based on some cheap test. This could have come from anywhere. You're making a mistake. Ethan shook his head. No, Marcus. His voice was low. Heavy. The mistake was thinking you'd actually let me have this day. Marcus's nostrils flared. Oh, please. Don't start with the dramatic brotherly betrayal nonsense. This has nothing to do with you. Lisa stepped forward, eyes burning. Marcus didn't answer. Joel folded his arms. Unless you have an explanation, this isn't looking good. Marcus's jaw tightened. He turned, scanning the guests as if searching for an escape. Max let out another growl. Ethan stepped closer. His voice was steel. Did you do this? Marcus's fingers twitched. The crowd wasn't breathing. Every second stretched unbearably long. Marcus licked his lips, swallowed, and for the briefest moment, he looked truly cornered. Then he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Lena staggered back. Clara gasped. Ethan's entire body went cold. Lisa's voice was sharp as a blade. So you did do it? Marcus didn't answer. But he didn't have to. Because the truth was already written on his face. The silence after Marcus's words was suffocating. It wrapped around the garden like a noose, tightening with every heartbeat. The celebration that had once been filled with laughter and joy now felt like a crime scene, the air thick with betrayal. Lena's breath hitched. She clutched Ethan's arm as if grounding herself, her nails digging into his sleeve. Marcus, she whispered, barely able to say his name. Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, his composure crumbling. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't smirking anymore. His usual, cocky demeanor had shattered, replaced by something else. Something raw. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low, controlled, but burning with barely restrained fury. "What do you mean, Marcus?" His pulse pounded in his ears. "You didn't mean for what to go this far." Marcus didn't answer. Clara was the first to explode. "You poisoned my daughter's wedding cake!" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the tense air. She surged forward, fists clenched, but Lisa caught her by the arm before she could reach him. Marcus shook his head wildly, as if trying to erase what had already been spoken. "No, I mean yes, but not like that." His voice cracked. "I didn't want to kill anyone. I just—" Ethan's voice was razor sharp. "Then what the hell did you think was gonna happen?" Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. Clara's rage only grew. "You tried to ruin my daughter's life on her wedding day."
What kind of mister?
Marcus snapped, a man who's tired of being nothing. His voice rang out, bitter and filled with years of resentment. His hands clenched at his sides as his gaze snapped to Ethan. "You always win, don't you? You get the business. You get the family's respect. You get the perfect life, the perfect wedding. And me," he let out a bitter laugh, "I get to watch from the sidelines." Again, Ethan's jaw tightened. "So what? You wanted to embarrass me? Ruin the wedding? That's your excuse?" "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Marcus shouted. "I thought—" He swallowed hard. "I thought someone would notice before it went too far." Lisa's voice was sharp. "You thought wrong." The weight of his actions hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. The guests whispered frantically, exchanging horrified glances. Some had already started backing away, eager to escape the unfolding disaster.
Chief Allen finally stepped forward. His face was unreadable.
"Marcus," he said, his deep voice quiet but commanding. Marcus hesitated, then slowly turned to face his father.
Chief Allen's expression didn't waver. He was looking at him as if he were a stranger.
"You poisoned the cake?" Marcus's throat bobbed. "Did you do it?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." Lena let out a choked sound and covered her mouth, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ethan's hands curled into fists. He had always known Marcus hated him. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Aunt Naomi's voice was cold. If Mac hadn't reacted, people could have died. The reality of the situation slammed into Marcus like a physical force. His breath hitched, his shoulders sagging.
"I swear to you," he rasped, "I didn't put enough to—"
"Enough." Ethan's voice was sharp as steel. "You put any." Marcus's lips trembled. There was no way out of this. Chief Allen exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. When he finally spoke, his words were final. "You are no longer my son." The world stopped. Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" "You heard me," Chief Allen said, his tone eerily calm. "You have disgraced this family. You have betrayed your own blood. You are no longer my son." "No," Marcus whispered, shaking his head. "No, Dad. Don't call me that." The words cut deep, leaving Marcus visibly shaken. "I made a mistake," he pleaded. "I wasn't thinking. I was angry. Chief Allen didn't blink. "And now you will live with the consequences." Marcus turned frantically, searching the crowd, looking for someone, anyone. Who would defend him? Nobody did. Lisa's voice was unyielding. Security. Two men in black suits stepped forward from the edges of the garden. Marcus's eyes widened. "Wait." The guards grabbed him by the arms. "No, wait."
He struggled, but their grip was firm.
"Ethan," he gasped, his voice raw, desperate. "Please, you're my brother." Ethan's expression didn't change. Not anymore. Marcus's breath came out in shallow gasps. He twisted in the guard's grip, his voice breaking. "Dad, please, don't do this. I messed up, but I'm still your son."
Chief Allen turned away.
That was the last blow. Marcus's entire body slumped. His face crumpled as he realized there was no coming back from this. As the guards dragged him toward the exit, Marcus gave one last broken whisper. "I didn't mean for it to end like this." Nobody answered. The crowd parted as they pulled him toward the gates, and Marcus's voice faded into the night. The garden fell into silence. Clara let out a shaky breath, rubbing her temples. "My daughter's wedding day," she muttered, shaking her head. "Completely destroyed." Lena exhaled sharply. "Mama?" "No," Clara snapped, her voice hoarse. "I don't want to hear it." She turned toward Chief Allen. "This is what your family has done." Chief Allen's face was lined with exhaustion. "You think this is easy for me, Clara?" His voice was low, tired. "I just disowned my own son." Aunt Naomi spoke softly. "At least no one was hurt." Lisa scoffed. "That's only because of Max." The German shepherd sat beside Ethan, his ears still alert, his gaze still fixed on where Marcus had been taken. Ethan knelt beside him, running a hand through his fur. "You saved us?" Ethan murmured. "Did you know that, boy?" Max let out a soft huff, nudging his nose against Ethan's palm. Lena knelt beside them. She cupped Max's face gently, her hands trembling. "If you hadn't barked," she whispered.
She couldn't even finish the sentence.
Her eyes brimmed with tears. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It's over," he said softly. "It's done." Lisa crossed her arms. "Is it?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Lisa's expression was grim. "This doesn't feel finished." A cold feeling settled in Ethan's chest. But before he could dwell on it, before anyone could, the first drops of rain began to fall. As if the sky itself was washing away the ruin of the night, the first raindrops struck the marble floor of the garden, soft at first, then heavier, washing over the remnants of what should have been a perfect wedding. The once beautiful decorations now felt hollow, their meaning stripped away. Guests, still murmuring in shock, began pulling their jackets over their heads or hurrying toward their cars. The celebration was over. The damage was done. Ethan stood still in the middle of it all, the scent of rain mixing with the lingering sweetness of ruined wedding cake. Lena was beside him, her fingers intertwined with his, holding on like he was the only thing keeping her upright. He turned to her, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. Lena let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. "I don't know." Her voice wavered, the weight of the evening pressing down on her. "I don't know how to feel right now." Ethan understood. How could anyone process something like this? The night had begun as a dream, elegant, joyful, the kind of wedding people would talk about for years. And now, it would still be talked about, but not for the reasons they had hoped. Lisa approached, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Ethan nodded. "They should. The wedding's over." Lisa hesitated, then glanced at Lena. "You're still married, though." The words hung in the air. Lena looked up at Ethan. "We are." Even through all the chaos, through all the betrayals, they had still spoken their vows. They had still promised forever. That part was real. And yet, Lena turned to look at the empty aisle, now littered with petals trampled by frightened guests. The altar, once glowing with warmth, now looked distant, like a memory she could barely grasp.
She swallowed hard. It doesn't feel like we got married.
Ethan understood. The moment that should have belonged to them had been stolen. Marcus had stolen it. Clara's voice cut through their quiet moment, sharp with frustration. Ethan exhaled slowly. We move forward. Clara laughed bitterly. Move forward, just like that. She shook her head, her hands clenched at her sides. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my daughter's life, and instead, it's a scandal. She turned to Chief Allen, her voice laced with anger. Your son did this? The older man didn't react at first. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carved from stone. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. I no longer have a son named Marcus. A hush fell over the group. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. Even she, despite her anger, recognized the weight of those words. Lena rubbed her temples, exhaustion settling into her bones. Can we not do this right now? Her voice was quiet but firm. I don't have the energy for another fight. Clara scoffed. You should be furious, Lena. I am, Lena snapped, surprising even herself. She turned to her mother, her hands shaking. I'm furious. But what do you want me to do? Rewind time. Pretend this never happened, because I can't. None of us can. Clara hesitated, clearly ready to argue, but something in Lena's eyes stopped her. Ethan ran a hand down his face, the exhaustion creeping in. We need to clean this up. Chief Allen nodded. I'll handle the guests. Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. People will talk about this for a long time. I don't care what people say, Ethan said firmly. I only care about her. He turned to Lena. We'll figure this out. Together. Lena searched his eyes, and for the first time that night, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. A soft whine broke through the tension. Max. He was sitting at Ethan's feet, his large brown eyes locked onto him, tail wagging just slightly, like he knew that despite everything, he had done his job. Lisa grinned. You know, for all the drama tonight, we can agree on one thing. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's that?
She pointed at Max.
This dog is the real MV. A small, tired chuckle escaped Ethan's lips. He knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears.
She's right, he murmured. You saved us.
Lena knelt beside him, cupping Max's face. If it weren't for you. Max wagged his tail. Clara sighed heavily, rubbing her temples.
We can't stay out here all night. Let's at least move inside.
Lena shook her head. I don't want to be here anymore. Ethan turned to her, his brows furrowing. What do you mean? I don't want to stay at this venue. I don't want to wake up tomorrow in some hotel room surrounded by reminders of this night. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. Can we just... Ethan exhaled. Where? Lena didn't hesitate. Anywhere but here. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Let's go. Clara was not happy. Lena, don't be rash. You can't just leave. I can, Lena interrupted, and I will. She turned to Ethan. Just us. No guests. No reporters. No family. Just you and me. Ethan's chest tightened. This was why he loved her. Even after everything, she still chose him. He laced his fingers through hers. Let's go. Lisa smirked. I'll make sure no one follows. Chief Allen stepped forward. Ethan. He turned. The older man studied him, then nodded. Take care of her. I will, Ethan promised. Lena turned to her mother, giving her a soft, tired look. I love you, Mama. But I need to do this my way. Clara, surprisingly, said nothing. She just nodded. And just like that, they left. No fanfare, No grand exits. Just two people walking away from the wreckage of what should have been the best night of their lives. Max trotted at their side, ever watchful, ever loyal. They didn't look back. Not once. The rain picked up, washing the night clean behind them. And somewhere in the distance, the first hints of morning began to rise. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. It means a lot that you were here, following every twist, every heartbreak, and every moment of resilience. At its core, this story isn't just about a ruined wedding or a shocking betrayal. It's about the choices we make when faced with anger, jealousy, and regret. Marcus let his resentment consume him, and in the end, he lost everything. But Ethan and Lena, they chose love, they chose each other, and they moved forward, refusing to let one tragic night define their future. Life is unpredictable. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But strength isn't about avoiding pain, it's about rising from it. No matter how broken a moment feels, we always have the power to rebuild. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What did this story make you think about? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. There's always more to tell, and I can't wait to share the next one with you. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop moving forward.